2002 AD, year 32 of the global fiat era, 7 years before Bitcoin. America and the world are reeling from the events of September 11, 2001. U.S. President George W. Bush delivers his first public speech announcing the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security and labeling Iran, Iraq, and North Korea as the axis of evil. The euro becomes the official currency of the European Union, which itself adds 10 more countries to its ranks. And NATO has its largest expansion in history, adding 7 more countries. The median house price is $188,000. Interest rates have tumbled to 1.6%, and so has inflation. Median annual income is now $42,000. The year's best picture is A Beautiful Mind, which chronicles the life of cryptographer and game theory pioneer John Nash. The film sets the stage with its opening line of dialogue where a Princeton professor declares,
"Mathematicians won the war. Mathematicians broke the Japanese codes and built the A-bomb."
On TV, American Idol debuts and rockets to the top of the ratings. Music executives hope it will save their now collapsing industry, decimated by internet file sharing and a new device just released by Apple Computer Corporation that promises to put 1,000 songs in your pocket, all of them downloaded. It is a time of rapid and massive change. Companies scramble to understand the impact of the internet and the changing world order. Congress grants the president permission to go to war with Iraq, and NATO and the United States are engaged in a war on terror in the Middle East. Americans are glued to the news.
So this is the third of our time machine panels. Yesterday we did 1982 and 1992, and we're kicking off today with 2002. Later on we'll do 2012. And the goal of these panels is to go back in time a little bit, connect it to the present so we can see the future a little more clearly. 2002, as you guys all saw from the video here, was a pretty monumental year. It was a bit of a turning point. I'm just going to turn to my panelists here and have us explore the year somewhat. Greg, maybe starting with you. 2001, a very memorable and tragic event took place: the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and it started to change a lot of things. What do you remember of that time, and how in 2002 the whole economy was being changed and the whole political framework was being changed?
So, yeah, it was actually an extremely sad time for me. So I remember the day vividly. I'm working on a trading floor in Toronto, and seeing, as everyone thought, a small plane had gone into the World Trade Center, right? Initially, you thought it was a small plane. And then it very quickly became apparent that they were jetliners. And unfortunately, I lost many friends that day, including my college roommate. So September 11th, 2001, rest in peace, Sean Lynch, who worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. Unfortunately, he and his brother perished that day. But what I remember vividly is they asked all the trading floors in Toronto to close as well. They were worried about attacks on the buildings in Toronto. And I remember going home on the train and just literally shaking. I can't believe this is happening. So it changed the world. It certainly changed me. And I will just say that it was the beginning of a journey that life is so precious, make every day count. And all I can say is the community that I am now part of, this Bitcoin community, and I'm trying not to jump ahead too much, but this is probably the day that my journey started. If I look back on it, September 11th, 2001. So I know it's the year 2002, but to be clear, I was over 30 years old, okay? A lot of these other kids, weren't around. So it's very, very scary time.
Yeah, and I think the fear that came into us created a fork in our civilization. There were those of us who were prepared to sacrifice something to quell our fear, our security, our privacy. It was 2002 was the year of the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security, and we see where those things have gone to. It looks like you want to say something else before I turn it over.
Because I said yesterday on stage, okay, I don't know all of you, but I'm a Canadian. We're so lucky to live rent-free in the attic of the United States, and you guys don't even know we're there, okay? And that being said, I was very comforted that day by the leadership shown in the United States, where President Bush tried to calm the world. Now, I'm not trying to be political here. I'm just looking back on a moment in my life where, my God, I never thought this would happen on American soil or North American soil.
Yeah. Alex, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the culture. You were playing sports at the time. The culture was becoming radically diluted in the sense of what creative works were coming out. I think we were so terrified and shell-shocked. American Idol had become the #1 TV show all of a sudden. It was essentially a karaoke show, and Americans were calling in. What do you remember of the culture at the time, and how was it potentially impacted and impacting the attitudes of America and the world?
Yeah, well, 2002, I was kind of hyper-focused on football and try to be a good student as well. But, like Greg, in 2001, I remember driving to school, listening to Howard Stern when the 9/11 attacks happened. And it didn't really, I didn't understand the finance world, business world, anything at that point. And, we were kind of focused on going on a pretty incredible run at USC where, we almost won 3 national championships in a row. And so, it's hard to put into words. I mean, the way that I look at things now, all roads lead to Bitcoin, but unfortunately, back then I had no concept of finance or the Federal Reserve or anything. And so it's hard for me to kind of tie those things together.
Yeah, you don't have to tie it into Bitcoin, but I think what's so amazing about the pivot points and the turning that we were starting to see was we were turning to sports, which was a real battle, and television was becoming, like with American Idol, these they weren't necessarily fake, but they were these battles of reality rather than people stepping back and creating artworks to tell the story of society. It was all battles, right? Like there was a battle in the Middle East. Sports teams were battling. Singers were karaoke battling. It seemed to be a big thread that was running through everything at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, I kind of view, we live in this instant gratification society now, which is horrible, and that's all because of Instagram and social media and all that. And now that I think about it, I guess American Idol kind of started that whole trend. So,
yeah. Okay, we will hold the microphones closer in front of our face. We just got a message up here. Ben, holding the microphone closely in front of your face. Technology was on a tear. Like, we're now at the point in time where technology is pervasive. It's everywhere. It's disrupting everything. The music industry, well, every industry is being disrupted. That's creating more chaos. It's not a deadly chaos like the terrorist attacks, but corporations and CEOs are fearing for their livelihoods. What do you remember of that time? You've been in security in a sense all this time, so you have quite a view on this, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So what I remember from before those years is a lot more freedom online. There was a lot more decentralization. The internet itself is a decentralized technology. And all of the systems built on it reflected that up until around that time. So if you wanted to chat with somebody, you'd maybe open an IRC client and connect to some random person's IRC server, and just you'd be chatting with all the same people connected. And anyone could run one of these servers. Now, you want to chat to somebody, you're using a centralized service. You're using Twitter or WhatsApp or whatever. And all of that came around the year 2002. So I think it was one of those responses to, again, those terrible things that happened in 2001, that terrible attack, and people got scared and things started getting centralized. Things started coming together and being taken over. So it's not just government reaction, there was also corporate reaction. And these corporations were building these centralized platforms and walled gardens to hold us together. And the internet now is a very different place than it was back then. So now we don't have the freedom to, use whatever chat systems we want or whatever, because nobody else is using them. You feel like you're trapped in because everyone else is doing it. But Bitcoin is the response to that on the financial side of things. Bitcoin is truly open money. So what I'm seeing from governments is things like CBDCs coming out now, and that's essentially the same type of thing as these centralized chat servers, these centralized communication systems. CBDCs are just the financial response to an open monetary network in the same way that those were a communication response to an open communication network. So I think we have a battle in front of us, and it's not going to be as easy as a lot of us think, but I'm also confident we are going to win it.
I mean, this ties into the theme. Centralization at that time was seen as the solution to a lot of problems, right? If we all got together, if we all unified under one common center, we would be able to prevent the tragedies that were happening in what seemed to be a falling apart world. It was the year that the euro was launched. Like, we all think 1971 was the year of America becoming a fiat currency, but 2001, there were 12 more currencies in Europe than there were in 2002. 12 currencies retired for the launch of the euro, and NATO expanded. It had its biggest expansion since World War II, or since it was first founded after World War II. So this notion of centralization being the answer, Greg, like, what led us to believe that this was the case, and what did it set us up for?
It's a great question. Probably what people were looking for was an escape from their fears, the feeling of helplessness. So therefore, centralize your trust in a government response. And to that, I'll just today, 20 years later, please everybody listen to Michael Saylor's interview on yesterday's CNBC. Sound bites, as only Mr. Saylor sitting in the front row can do, is crystallize things in 2 minutes that makes it appear so obvious to people like me. Now, whether it hits the average man or woman on Wall Street listening to CNBC, perhaps not right away, but they'll see it over time. Everything is centralized, and therein is the problem, and Bitcoin is the solution. I'm jumping ahead 20 years, but please see that interview by Mr. Saylor yesterday. It was outrageously good. So in 2001, if you asked me what I was looking for, yes, probably more centralized control, because I was scared about where the world was going. In fact, it was the wrong solution, but it was a human response.
Yeah, so maybe now we're having the counter response. At the same time, 2002 was also the year. This is both a cultural and a technological question, so I'll pose it to you first, Alex, and then to you, Ben. It was the year of this terrible, terrible thing that happened, as far as corporations were concerned, called peer-to-peer file sharing. And people were using this distributed technology to share music for free. And this was obviously very, very disturbing for the music industry. It was made a crime. We had the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which was launched as a follow-up suit that was getting takedown orders of people putting music online, and actually the music companies were suing their own customers and threatening them with criminal offenses that could serve jail time. So becoming a consumer of culture in the way that the technology was permitting it had become criminal in that year. And so that's the cultural side of the question. What do we make of what ended up happening with the corporation suing their own customers for trying to obtain their product? Alex, go ahead, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can very clearly remember getting my first DVD RW drive and making CDs for all my classmates. And so I didn't charge anything, so I don't think that's illegal. But
turns out it is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, don't tell anyone. So
it wasn't. Interestingly, it wasn't illegal in the time. We made mixtapes as the older generation, but there was a limit as to how quickly it could go. Peer-to-peer file sharing made it ubiquitous.
Right. I mean, I think the writing was on the wall at that point. Obviously, I didn't know anything about encryption, or back then I had no idea. But the concept that I could go on these platforms that were decentralized, download tiny little bits of one song from 10,000 people has obviously paved the way for where we're at now.
So Ben, is sharing data peer-to-peer an evil thing? Or might it have some good applications sometime in the future?
Information wants to be free. Information cannot not be free. So yeah, I think it's a good thing to be able to share, and I think any artificial blocks we put on it are essentially that. They are artificial. So we as a society need to find ways to be able to deal with the reality that we share data, and not artificially try to constrain it with things like laws and regulations that just don't match how the world actually functions.
And maybe there is something that uses peer-to-peer file sharing technology that could turn out to be valuable and distributed. Yeah, no, go ahead. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, just going to say, peer-to-peer is, of course, the basis behind Bitcoin, and Bitcoin couldn't function any other way. So, of course, that's the ultimate example of peer-to-peer being used in the real world. And again, it's something which I'm sure there's going to be a lot more government attacks. There's going to be a lot more people saying, sure, you can use Bitcoin as long as it's via these centralized services, which means you're not actually using Bitcoin. So, it needs to be your Bitcoin transacted peer-to-peer from you to the other person.
I think there's actually a really important historical reference just listening to you say that. Like, this music file sharing, music streaming was not being offered. The record companies were not making it available until a consumer movement, a an open source movement started to take it over. And then the corporation stepped in and the government stepped in to support them. And we ended up with what we have today, which is that artists aren't really able to make money. The musicians aren't making money in music. What we have is a handful of centralized services being the rent seekers who are making all the money. And I think it's an outcome we would like to repair in that industry potentially, and certainly not see repeat itself again. I don't know if any of you want to comment on that in particular or not. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
I used to work in entertainment, so I wouldn't say they don't make any money, but they distribute
very
the
few
money.
do, yeah.
They distribute the money, right? Yeah. So I think obviously that needs to shift, right? A majority of the money does go to the platforms, and a majority of the money should be going to the artists. So,
yeah, a couple more questions. Turning back to the economy, Greg. Like this was also the time when the interest rates got really low for the first time. They had been in the previous panels we did. They had been like 15%. And then like 8%. Now they're approaching 1% again. And this is fueling the housing bubble and potentially fueling inflation later on. But it's done to preserve and protect the economy. What were people thinking then? The housing bubble hadn't quite kicked in yet, but all the stage was set for it.
Well, okay, so the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield runs the world. Everything is priced off of that rate. Whether it's mortgages domestically or honestly, whether it's emerging market debt, whether it's high yield debt, everything is set off of the US 10-year Treasury rate. And what happened in 2002 was a response to the 2001 attacks. The economy, demand evaporated, the economy was in a shambles, and the trigger response by the Fed is to cut rates, okay? They had room to cut rates, but if you look back on it, it was actually the beginning of the helicopter Ben Bernanke economies, where you have a Fed put. Essentially, the Fed is there to rescue the markets. And if I can go back to September 2011, I'll never forget the day where I was sitting. I was actually, I'm a bond trader, but I was actually on the equity trading floor for a couple of days. And I remember they couldn't get the markets open, okay? You remember they closed the stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange. And the big thing for the USA, God bless capitalism, was to reopen the New York Stock Exchange. They had to do it. It was like a bastion of capitalism. They had to get it open, and they knew it was going to crash. And I'll never forget, there was almost floods of orders coming in that were patriotic buy orders. And I remember a salesman setting up in the back of the room, I'm buying everything. I got everything on. I'm a buyer. And he just got filled like a wave of selling. And I remember thinking, remove emotion from the investing process. This was a big blue chip US account that was coming into Canada trying to support the capitalism north of the border. And he just got run over like a poor little animal on the road. That being said, the USA led us out of this again. They will lead us out of the situation we're in right now because they are the last bastion of freedom in the world. We have to get out of this. The USA has raised rates back to a level that will set the rates for the rest of the world right now. And it's finally at a point where it balances risk and return. It wasn't there. It was artificially low. We're back to a level that it's the least today, managing risk versus return. So 2001, 2002 was the beginning of this artificial suppression of interest rates. We've come back up. I'm afraid, USA, it's too late though. There's only one solution. It's called Bitcoin, because your debt spiral is now unsustainable. Sorry to work that into this answer, but the mathematics just don't allow you to recover from 20 years of mismanagement. Pure mathematics, grade 11 math, don't overthink it. All paths lead to Bitcoin.
Correct.
All right, back to math. Any true Bitcoiner will turn any question into an answer about Bitcoin. But I want to talk about the best picture Oscar winner of the year was called A Beautiful Mind. And it chronicled the life of a mathematician. And I showed the opening scene in that preview where the Princeton professor is addressing the graduate math class. And he says, mathematicians won the war. Mathematicians built the bomb. Mathematicians broke the codes. He says they broke the Japanese codes, but I think they broke the German codes. Hollywood should have done a little more research as to whose codes were broken. But we had this projection of mathematicians are the heroes who save the world. And I don't know if that has any kind of Bitcoin connection to anybody here. Math is what we're relying on to save us from all of these problems that I think 2002, 2001 were this pivot point for, the opening for all the dangers of centralization and surrendering our privacy, surrendering our freedom for security has gone too far. And it is math that we are relying on to pull those rights back. And I'd kind of like to hear a comment from each of you on that, because it comes, I know, Greg, you come from a math loving perspective, and Ben, this is technology, and then it's also just from the culture and the sports and everything. How do we get our freedom back? So maybe we'll just go across, starting with Ben, and talk about how is math, and maybe if you want to show some admiration for any particular mathematician, you're welcome to.
So I admire a lot of mathematicians. I won't name any names, but I would say Satoshi Nakamoto is a real mathematician. Bitcoin is not an internet protocol. Everyone in this room who thinks Bitcoin is an internet protocol, I'm sorry to say you're wrong. Bitcoin is a mathematical protocol. Bitcoin exists even without the internet. I can pull out a piece of paper and a pen and do the maths to generate a private key and generate addresses from it. Bitcoin is a purely mathematical protocol, and without mathematicians to figure out how all this works, you don't have Bitcoin. So, we thank the mathematicians for Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's tough to tie math, in my experience in 2002. But I would say watching that film back then, even though I played football, I actually came from an academic background, and I was a classical violinist, which I'm sure no one here is going to believe, but it's probably on the internet somewhere. I was always fond of math. Like I don't think you need to be a mathematician to understand Bitcoin, though. It's pretty binary. So when I try to explain to entertainers or athletes or people I work with in general, it's a very simple conversation with me. Like, this is a binary thing. You either believe in supply and demand or you don't, and that's all it comes down to.
I like that, and thanks for letting me go last, because you gave me a great idea. It's binary, people. It's that simple, all right? And I like to summarize it as all I bring to the table is 35 years of mistakes, okay? I've been managing risk for 35 years. You've probably heard that. But Bitcoin, very simply, is the greatest asymmetric investment opportunity I've ever seen. You can play it as a binary outcome and do an expected value calculation. Very simply, if you own 0 Bitcoin, you're taking an extreme amount of risk relative to owning a proper portfolio allocation. That's mathematics. It's also statistics and expected values that make me committed to doing this for the future of the children. I have 3 kids. I'm talking to some younger people on stage here. I've never been so proud to be part of a movement where I meet people who are all directionally aligned along mathematics and truth, okay? It's that simple. It's called Bitcoin. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. This has been terrific. This is all the time we have for this panel, so we'll bring up the next group. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.